just have the commissioner do his presentation for 9 minutes, and then we'll start into questions, if that's okay with everybody, I believe, but off we go. To you, Commissioner.
Merci, Monsieur le.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
For your committee to discuss 5 reports, which were tabled in the House of Commons on Tuesday. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. With me today are Kimberly Leach, James McKenzie, Susan Gomez, and David Normand, who are responsible for the audits.
3 of our 5 reports are about reductions in greenhouse gas emissions that are urgently needed to address the global climate crisis. Emissions in Canada are higher today than when this country and the world first committed to fighting climate change, more than 30 years ago.
Come and gone, and Canada has yet to deliver on any. Meanwhile, the need to reverse the trend on Canada's greenhouse gas emissions has grown only more pressing. This is not my first time sounding the alarm, and I will continue to do so until Canada turns the tide. Our first audit focuses on the 2030 emissions reduction plan developed by Environment and Climate Change Canada under the new Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. While we were not required to begin reporting on the implementation of this plan until the end of 2024, given the urgent need for Canada to up its game in the fight against climate change, we decided to move more quickly. We found that the plan was insufficient to meet Canada's target to reduce emissions by 40 to 45% below the 2005 level by 2030. Selon ces projections les plus récentes,
in its most recent projections, Environment and Climate Change Canada disclosed that the measures detailed in the plan would reduce emissions by only 34% below the 2005 level. Measures needed to meet the 2030 target were delayed by departments or were not prioritized. We found a lack of reliability and transparency in economic and emission modeling, leading the government to make overly optimistic assumptions about emission reductions. I was also concerned to find that responsibility for reducing emissions was fragmented among multiple federal entities, not directly accountable to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. This means that the minister has no authority to commit other entities to meet the target.
Measures in the plan, such as carbon pricing and regulations, have the potential for deep emission reductions if they are stringent enough and applied widely. The federal government can still reduce emissions and meet its 2030 target with drive, focus, and leadership. Implementing our recommendations would be a step in the right direction. Let's turn now to our report on departmental progress in implementing sustainable development strategies. We assessed the progress made by National Defence, Parks Canada, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and the Canada Border Services Agency in meeting the target of converting 80% of the federal fleet to zero-emission vehicles by 2030. Together, these 4 organizations are responsible for most of the vehicles owned by the federal government. We found that the percentage of zero-emission vehicles across all 4 organizations was very low, ranging from 1 to 3% in 2022.
At this pace, only 13% of federal vehicles will be zero emissions by 2030, a far cry from the 80% target. None of the organizations had a strategic approach for how they planned to meet the target. With a target date of 2030, and given that the government typically replaces its vehicles on a 7-year cycle, these organizations must act quickly to develop and implement realistic plans for acquiring zero-emission vehicles so that the government fleet can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
On the topic of zero-emission vehicles, Our audit of the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Program found that Natural Resources Canada had contributed to expanding the charging infrastructure overall. The program is set to exceed its 2026 target of installing 33,500 charging ports. As of July 2023, 33,887 charging ports were either completed or under development. However, we also found that in funding charging stations, the department had not prioritized underserved areas, including rural, remote, and Indigenous communities and lower income areas. The vast majority of ports were located in Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia. Même si le gouvernement fait
While the federal government is not solely responsible for funding charging stations for zero-emission vehicles, it can do more to help bridge the gaps in infrastructure that are unlikely to be addressed by the private sector. We found that Natural Resources Canada did not collect data to help it identify these gaps, nor did it set targets for underserved areas.
a large gap between the current number of charging stations and those needed by 2035. Natural Resources Canada needs to work with other levels of government and with the private sector to address gaps in charging infrastructure so Canadians feel confident making the switch to zero-emission vehicles. Passons maintenant à
Turning now to our audit of monitoring commercial marine fisheries catch, we found that Fisheries and Oceans Canada was unable to collect dependable and timely fish catch data. The department did not have a full picture of the health of Canada's fish stocks. We also noted that the department needed to improve its oversight of the information it received from third parties. We found that many of the weaknesses we reported when we last audited this area 7 years ago remain problematic. For example, the department created a fish monitoring policy in response to a recommendation in our 2017 report, but we found that it had not implemented this policy nor supported it with resources or an action plan.
also flagged that Fisheries and Oceans Canada's information systems needed to be modernized to support the collection of dependable and timely data. We found that progress in this area has been very slow. Fisheries and Oceans Canada has spent about $31 million to implement a system to provide ready access to data and integrate information across all its regions. However, we found that the department's rollout of this new system is incomplete and that a full launch has been delayed by 10 years. Without dependable and timely data on fish being caught, Fisheries and Oceans Canada does not know whether commercial stocks are being overfished. The collapse of the Atlantic cod population in the 1990s, with its far-reaching economic and social impacts, has shown that it is far more expensive and difficult to recover depleted stocks than it is to keep them healthy in the first place. Mardi dernier, nous avons
On Tuesday, we also released the annual report on environmental petitions. Petitions are a way for Canadians to raise their concerns relating to the environment and sustainable development and receive a response from responsible ministers. In closing, I want to emphasize again that the window to avoid catastrophic climate change is closing fast. Intense forest fires, smoke-filled skies, heat waves, violent storms, and flooding are becoming more severe and frequent and affecting people all across Canada.
is the only G7 country that has not achieved any emission reduction since 1990. Taking meaningful action to reduce emissions is the most impactful thing Canada can do to play its part in addressing the global climate emergency. Solutions exist, such as renewing the government's fleet with zero-emission vehicles or implementing effective fiscal and regulatory measures to reduce greenhouse gases. The problem is that available solutions are being implemented much too slowly. That needs to change now. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening statement. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeMarco. And we start with our first round of questioning and with Mr. Detail.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and congratulations for your appointment today. Bonjour, messieurs, dames, et bienvenue à votre
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the House of Commons. Mr. DeMarco, it's always wonderful to speak to you. Will Canada achieve its 2030 targets, Mr. DeMarco? Yes or no? Answer, it's possible, but they will need to take more measures than has been found in the plan up till now. Well, talking about measures, in 626 of your report, you know that you say that 95% of the directives don't have goals. So what's the point of having all these announcements if there are no objectives? Well, that's a theme of this report and also the spring report on regulations of greenhouse gases, or regulation of greenhouse gases. We recommend that they be more transparent with the measures and the emission reduction measures taken, and if there are interactions between the measures. But if there's no targets, it's difficult to assess any results. Does that explain the fact that Canada is the only country in the G7 that hasn't achieved those goals? Well, that's one of the reasons. We published a report 2 years ago with 8 lessons learned from these failures, but that's one of them, and there are more. So this has been carrying on over the last 8 years. We haven't met any of our goals. Well, as you know, since 1992, when Canada and the world committed to take on this huge challenge, Canada is the only G7 country that has not achieved those emission reductions. So this has been a problem for a long time. And for the last 8 years, it has been perpetuated, yes. When you talk about transparency for having clear goals, the government imposed on each department to have 90% of zero-emission vehicles by 1930. So right now, it's only between 1% and 3%. So how can the government convince Canadians when they can't even convince their own departments to do this? Well, that's an issue of leadership, leading by example. It's very important for Canada as a country to show leadership, because all Canadians are part of the solution. But if they don't see a sufficient level of leadership from the federal level, that will affect Canadians who will question whether the federal government is doing its part or not. So yes, it's very important to show leadership, and it's not only on emissions reduction, but also the effect of signaling to Canadians that the federal government is contributing in an efficient and effective manner to reduce emissions within its own operations. Well, there's been a lack of leadership. People explain the situation in some departments because there were needs that hadn't been met, and they didn't have access to chargers for vehicles, and it's exactly the same problems that citizens who want to have electric cars are facing. So why does the government want to impose certain measures on zero-emission vehicles by 2035 when they can't even manage to do this with their own departments? When they were looking for 90%, and now we're looking at 3% at the moment. Well, there are clearly obstacles. For example, that of the unavailability of charging infrastructure for departmental fleets for people who are living and working in rural areas, and that's the private sector and the provinces need to help and to meet that challenge as well and facilitate the access to those vehicles in those areas. So it's an ecosystem of measures that need to be managed so that we will be able to manage that transition. Well, let's take a tangible example that people are aware of. Behind the Confederation building, there are charging stations. There are 4 that have been there for a long time. There are 2 new ones that don't work. The old ones work well. So what's the point of making big announcement and establishing these very ambitious targets when we can't achieve these targets and we don't have the necessary reliability? Well, we have a recommendation on that particular point exactly. The reliability of the infrastructure. The reliability is necessary in order to convince Canadians to move on to zero-emission vehicles. Do I have time? Concerning the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, you said that the monitoring is following a recommendation in our 2017 report, and we found it was not implemented nor supported with resources. So how is it that the department didn't do anything over that period of time? Well, our office, within the Office of the Auditor General of Canada, issued a report on this 7 years ago, and I was disappointed to see that we needed to recommend a second time many things that we had already pointed out 7 years ago. So we need to see progress and not just to hear good answers.
Okay, Adam Van Koeren. Mr. Van Koeren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to the chair position
Thank you.
for the day. Thank you very much, Mr. DeMarco, for appearing again at committee. Welcome back, and thank you to all of the witnesses and experts. Our panel is well attended today, and that we appreciate the opportunity to ask some good questions. Now, Mr. DeMarco, you focus on ambition a lot in your report. I appreciate that. I'm a strong believer that we need to be more ambitious with respect to achieving our climate targets and our decarbonization. I'm also a strong believer in carbon pricing and the impact that can have as a market-based instrument in reducing our emissions. So, it is a topic of conversation in the House of Commons as well as in the media quite frequently. And it seems as though the conversation that we're having in the House of Commons isn't so much about how we fight climate change, but whether we fight climate change. I agree with much of your report, and I appreciate it. In broad strokes, I feel as though I would take away from it that there are all of the necessary architecture in place necessary to continue our action on fighting climate change and increase our emissions reductions plan, lower our emissions even more, but we need to move faster. We need to set larger targets and higher targets, more ambitious targets. Would you agree with that characterization? And could you also point to the importance and value in a market-based instrument like carbon pricing in its contribution to those emissions reductions targets?
So there was a lot there. I'm not sure I feel comfortable agreeing with everything you just said, but I'll start towards the end and pick up there. So as noted in our report, this plan does have some critical elements in terms of carbon pricing and regulations under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act that have the potential for achieving deep emissions reductions. There are 80 measures in the plan, but several of them are the big ticket items, if you'd call it that. So it's very important that Canada has a plan that adds up. In this case, it doesn't quite add up on paper just yet, but if they do add, if Environment and Climate Change Canada and its partner departments do add to the portfolio of measures and they're strong enough and effective enough, there still is time to reach the target. I'm not sure if I've addressed everything in your comment and question, but I'll stop there, and then you can let me know if there's something else I need to cover.
Thank you, Mr. DeMarco. I appreciate that answer. My next question is for Mr. Nagan or Mr. Hermanitz. With respect to carbon pricing, it's difficult to quantify how much of our reductions that we've seen since 2005, and I appreciate that we can measure our emissions reductions since 1990 or 2005. I've seen all the graphs in the G7, and it's challenging to identify exactly when we ought to start measuring, but we have seen a 6% reduction in emissions as a country since 2005, and since 2019 those have gone down quite dramatically, and that's also not coincidentally, in my view, around the same time we started pricing carbon emissions and pollution in Canada with a federal carbon tax. I know it's challenging to attribute, how much of those emissions reductions are attributable to carbon pricing. Do you have an estimation or some insight for us with respect to perhaps a range that might be attributable? Anybody that might have that insight? So Brian?
Yeah, I can do it. Yeah, you're right. It is very difficult in the package of 80 different measures to attribute specific megatons to individual measures, although we know carbon pricing is a significant contributor to the expected reductions. I think the commissioner's report agrees with that statement. But I think we're probably in a world where we could say, with some rough analysis, that up to 1/3 potentially of the emissions reductions that we're projecting to 2030 would come from carbon pricing.
1/3 of the 6% reduction that we've seen, or so that we've seen since 2019?
This is from 2005 to 2030.
Thank you very much. And I've garnered a lot of insight from the province of British Columbia, who basically started pricing carbon first. They've been a model for the world, in fact, and how to reduce emissions through an effective market-based instrument system. Any insight that we can garner from the province of British Columbia being out front in that regard?
Thank you for the question. First of all, Derek and I are not the lead officials for the carbon pricing system. That being said, when the pricing system was developed, a lot of lessons learned were undertaken. And also, as we know, carbon pricing is a worldwide recognized instrument to effectively drive greenhouse gas emission reduction. And also, the pricing system provides incentives through a cost-neutral system of returning proceeds back to households as well as small, medium, and enterprises. Therefore, this is a very effective system that we know. That being said, I regret that I do not work on this file as intimately as other colleagues, and therefore this is the extent to which I can comment on the instrument.
Thank you, Mr. Nhan. My last question is for Mr. DeMarco. If we were to stop pricing carbon altogether in Canada, in every province and territory, if we eliminated the price on pollution, would that bring us closer to achieving our targets of a 40 to 45% emissions reduction by 2030, or would it bring us farther away from achieving those targets?
If you eliminated carbon pricing and didn't replace it with something else just as significant?
Another market-based instrument, perhaps, but yes, eliminate carbon pricing.
If you eliminate it without compensating, then you're talking about what Environment and Climate Change Canada believes is responsible for 1/3 of the reduction. So
On the replies, if you want to provide it in writing, that's fine, but it's up on.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, okay. But I mean, it's 30 seconds over.
leave it that
He answered
if
your
you
question.
eliminate it and don't replace it with something just as effective, then there's an obvious gap that Environment Canada estimates to be 1/3.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Madame Posey, 6
Oui,
minutes.
alors,
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for being here. I'm sorry. I don't know if there's a problem with the. I'm hearing an echo. I hope that's not counting on my time. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for being present here, and thank you, Mr. DeMarco. I like very much when you say that you're going to continue to work until Canada has reversed this trend. That is great professionalism on your part that I want to emphasize. My questions will be to the Deputy Minister, Mr. Ngan. In Report 6, we know things that we already knew, which is that the Liberal government has failed to meet its own commitments in terms of fighting against climate change, and that Canada, once again, is not going to meet its emissions reduction target. So to know whether or not they're going to achieve this, the government has to calculate the projection of these emissions over the years. And the report tells us that the government's calculations are not good. So I'll quote the report: the modelization is an important tool to see what these are achieved or determined in the plan, and in order to see if adjustments need to be made. So, paraphrasing the rest, essentially, modelization has to be a high quality one. It has to be reliable because Canada is not achieving any consistency in reductions in emissions for years. So it seems to me that if their calculations are bad, it's not surprising that we're not meeting the objectives. So we've had 10 plans in a row that have failed. So why are the calculations not good? So the commissioner tells us is that the government is too optimistic in their projections, and so in other words, the government is not realistic. And I think that they think that everything is going well because they're in power, and that there's some kind of magic happening here. So once again, the commissioner said that models presumed that there would be no delay in the implementation of these mitigation measures, but the government hasn't even met their own recommendation. So the regulation on the cap on emissions is 2 years behind schedule. The regulations on clean electricity, another Liberal promise, is also delayed. And according to the commissioner, these are these delays explain why the government won't meet its emissions reduction targets. It's as though the government doesn't even assess its own ability to fail. So, Mr. Ingen, how do you explain how the government is not achieving its promises or engage commitments and is always overly optimistic, or also fails to put forth measures that will reduce these emissions and help us with climate change?
Thank you very much for the question. It's a very comprehensive question, so I will answer it in two parts. The first part is to talk about how the emission reduction plan has achieved emissions reduction since its inception. The second part is to touch upon the modeling approach, and I will turn to my colleague, Mr. Hermanitz. First of all, I would fully agree with the findings and the recommendations of the Commissioner. There is still work to be done in order for us to meet the ambitious 2030 goal of at least 40% emissions reductions compared to the 2005 levels. That being said, I think that it's also fair to demonstrate that Canada has achieved meaningful emissions reductions. We are already substantially bending the curve on emissions in Canada, and that is reversing a trajectory of emissions that would have gone unconstrained without any limitation in the future to one that is now significantly going downward.
Monsieur, je vais me permettre de...
I'm going to interrupt you, allow myself to do that, because that really replies to Mr. Van Couverden's question. I'm talking about the modelization that we're overly optimistic, and I would like us to perhaps hear from Mr. Element.
We don't agree that the projections are overly optimistic. We follow several processes to ensure that they're realistic. We follow UNFCCC guidelines in how we prepare the projections. We've submitted 5 biennial reports to the UNFCCC in the last 5 years, all of which are subject to external review from accredited UNFCCC experts. We rely heavily on third-party information. Our projections are based on historical data that's published in the National Inventory Report, data from Statistics Canada. Our energy forecast comes from the Canada Energy Regulator.
Je vais vous arrêter.
I'm going to stop you there because that comes back to an answer the Commissioner gave. What I understand, we talk transversibility of files in education. So there are files that cover all departments, and I don't know if we need a new agency for people to really get onto this and just sit down and talk to each other. However, it is focused on measures that don't exist. I've seen the emission reduction plan, and it's targeting measures that don't exist. There's no modeling. We've had promises and commitments as though these measures truly existed. So there's this reduction target that is supposed to use measures that don't exist, like electric buses. So I'm wondering, is the government look at its dreams as though they were realities? Or, I mean, how otherwise can we explain this criticism of the Commissioner?
I would say within the modeling, we follow UNFCCC guidelines, which builds a reference case of policies that are legislated, funded, or implemented, as well as announced measures, which includes measures that have been announced by both the federal, provincial, and territorial governments.
Thank you, Madam Bezet. And now Mr. Bachrach for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I want to start by thanking Mr. DeMarco for his work and for his determination to ensure that through this accountability process, the government gets back on track. And I think that's a shared desire by many of us at this table. This isn't meant as an opportunity to bash the government. We very much need the government to do right by its promise that it's going to meet the commitments that it's made on the most important issue of our time. And I want to thank you, Mr. DeMarco, for your part in that. I'm a little bit concerned to hear what seems like a disagreement between Mr. Hermanouts and yourself around whether the projections are optimistic or not. The accountability measure that we have involves the work of the Environment Commissioner, and so the Environment Commissioner is saying that the projections are overly optimistic and that we're not going to meet the target. And so I would hope that Environment and Climate Change Canada would take that information very seriously and abide by the recommendations and the strong direction that's been provided by the Commissioner. I'm trying to think of where to start. There are so many questions. One of them is that when we worked on the Canada Zero Emissions Accountability Act, one of the things we fought very hard for was a 2026 emissions objective. We felt that 2030 was too far out and that the government was going to drag its feet and then at the last minute throw up its hands and say we just can't possibly do it. Or perhaps by then we have a different government who doesn't care about it anyway. So it was important to have a near-term target or objective. And I wonder, Mr. DeMarco, if you considered that objective and if you would have any insights to share on whether we're on track to meet that objective in just a few short years.
Thank you for the question. So the 20% target in 2026 is called an objective in the legislation, and it is an important addition because typically the targets are so many years out that by the time we get close to the target year, there's already a new target and a new plan replacing it, and the narrative is more about the latest one without closing the loop on how we did on the last one. But when you see the litany of failures over the years, it's important that we do something different rather than repeating the same thing we've done in the past and expecting different results. So I'm pleased that there is an objective for 2026. The current emissions graph doesn't show that it's going to trend in the right direction to meet 2026, but we don't have enough transparency to be able to say for sure one way or the other. If they added a number of measures quickly, it's conceivable they could reach it. With the current measures in the plan, they already admit that they don't add up enough to meet their targets. So it remains to be seen, but the imposition of additional measures would increase their chances of meeting that interim objective in 2026.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. DeMarco. Now, when we look across the Canadian economy at all of the sectors that contribute to our emissions profile, the progress on driving down those emissions has not been symmetrical across all these different, whether it's buildings or electricity or transport or the oil and gas sector. If you were to highlight a sector where the least progress has been made on reducing emissions, which sector would that be?
So there are sectors that have made no progress, so it's negative progress for some. So I presume you'd rather hear about the ones that are the worst overall in terms of not achieving any reductions. So oil and gas is up between 80 and 90% in terms of emissions from 1990 to now. So that would...
Sorry, oil and gas is up 80 to 90%?
Yes.
Since when?
Since 1990, when the baseline year for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the baseline year for the IPCC. So oil and gas is up 88% approximately. Electricity is down 45%. But because oil and gas is such a large sector, in fact, it is the largest sector in terms of emissions, it drowns out the progress in other sectors.
So there are two key policies that have yet to be implemented for the oil and gas sector. One of them is the emissions cap being the most significant of those. When it comes to the emissions cap for the oil and gas sector, are you concerned about stringency? And could you elaborate on those concerns?
Yes, so that's why we note in the report that if measures are widely applied and stringent enough, they have the potential to achieve the target. We just know that there's a notion of a cap, but we don't know the details of it. So it's impossible to predict if that will bridge the gap between their current estimation of 34% to 40 or not. But it does target the sector that is the greatest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in Canada, and the sector whose emissions have risen the most since
And when we ask you to come back and talk to us about the emissions cap and whether it's being effective, what are some key attributes that you would be looking at when it comes to stringency and effectiveness? Or the converse of that is, what are the potential loopholes that would undermine the effectiveness of this policy?
Yeah, one of the lessons learned from Canada's history is it can achieve efficiency progress. So per GDP, per capita, emissions are down in Canada over the last 30 years. But it's the total that is the target for Canada. The total is for the world is what the total emissions, net emissions is what affects ultimately global average temperatures. So the key thing would be for any measure to address the total and not just the efficiency with which we pollute.
Thank you. Do I have more time, Mr. Chair?
Oh, 10 seconds.
Okay.
Oh, no, you're over. Sorry, it's the other way.
Oh, I'm
It's
over.
counting.
Oh, look at that.
Oh, light's red, so sorry about that.
I exceeded my target.
There you go. So we'll start the second round with Mr. Graham for
Okay.
5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Mr. DeMarco, I would just like to do a very quick summary of Report 7 on zero-emission vehicles, if I may. So the government's goal was for federal government vehicles that are net zero, or that are zero emissions, to be at 80% by the end of the decade. We are currently sitting at 3%, and you estimate that we should come in around 13% at the end of the decade, well below the 80% goal. Is that an accurate summary?
Yes, if the current trend of acquisition were to continue at the same pace, they'd only hit 13% rather than 80. Hopefully that current trend is not just a fait accompli, and they can change that, but it'll require a strategic approach for them to do that.
Okay, so let's start with this question. Where does the federal government get its vehicles from? Does it purchase them from regular car dealerships across the country the same way as regular Canadians do?
I'll turn that over to the department to talk about the internal operations. We were focused on the results of the program as opposed to the operational requirements.
So my colleague Nick Senos, Executive Director of Treasury Secretariat responsible for greening government operations, will join us. And
so we buy it off a standing offer of PSPC, so Public Services and Procurement Canada, who buys it from the manufacturers.
Okay, very good. So I looked at the Statistics Canada website, and the uptake of zero-emission vehicles for the general population is at about 1%. That was at the end of 2021. So in the same ballpark as the federal government. So I would like to read a quick quote from page 11 of the report. So it says, "Not all of the operational requirements of the four selected federal organizations could be met by the zero-emission vehicles on the market during the audit period. These include trucks needed to pull loads for long periods of time and vehicles that can work in harsh weather conditions." So if the uptake of electric vehicles among the general population is about the same as the federal government, would it be reasonable to conclude that individual Canadians and Canadian companies that are trying to transition to electric vehicles are encountering the same challenges, and that's why they're experiencing similar results. Yes, Mr. DeMarco.
So, yeah, this relates to an earlier question about leading by example. We would expect, given that Canada is requiring all Canadians to have only zero-emission vehicles available for purchase by 2035, it's very important for the federal government to step up and lead by example in greening their fleet. If Canadians don't see the federal government walking the talk, then they'll be less inclined to do their part, especially when it comes to something like this where it's not just a hoped-for behavioral change, it's an actual requirement that sales have to be 100% electric by 2035 for light-duty vehicles. Yeah.
So another reason why Canadians may want to transition to electric vehicles is to avoid paying the carbon tax. When the carbon tax was introduced in 2019, it was at 4 cents a litre. Now it's up to 14 cents a litre and projected to increase to 37 cents a litre by the end of the decade. Now, I would like to read a quote from yesterday in question period. Yesterday in question period, the Prime Minister described the carbon tax as, quote, one of the most successful measures Canada has ever seen in the fight against climate change. Mr. DeMarco, in your audits, have you come across any evidence to support that statement?
So the theory of the carbon levy, which is using a levy, a charge, to partially internalize what was previously an economic externality in terms of economic theory, that is well recognized as being a sound approach. We did our carbon pricing audit very early on to look at mostly design issues and coverage and equitability and all of those things that are still being discussed today. We haven't done another follow-up that looks at exactly how much bang for their buck they're getting out of the carbon price. But the theory of carbon pricing in economics is a sound one, so long as it's widely applicable and the price is high enough to induce the behavioral change that is sought.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's the end of the 5 minutes. So, Mr. Longfield online.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. DeMarco and officials for being here. On the zero-emission vehicles, with my limited amount of time, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but we did a study in this committee on zero-emission vehicles that showed that the provincial programs and federal programs combined get results that we're now at 7% nationally, but 21% in BC and 18% in Quebec, where there are also provincial programs to incent people to go to zero-emission vehicles. So the progress is actually ramping up, but of course, I think implied in the questions is supply chain may not be keeping up with demand on the market, although we are seeing increases. But I'd like to go back to the Accountability Act itself, that we didn't have a Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. And some people in the committee, I know Mr. Bachrach and Madame Posey were very instrumental in where we've landed. Of course, the Liberals, I was at the table as well, and very glad to see that the audit is actually in front of us. I wasn't expecting to see it for a few years. Mr. DeMarco, could you comment on the process that we're trying to get to net zero by 2040, and by 2050, by 2030, we have some goals. The reason that we're doing this audit is really to get to net zero by 2050. Could you comment on how this act is actually helping us in that regard?
Thank you for the question. Turning back to my appearance here a couple of years ago with respect to our lessons learned from Canada's record on climate change, we expressed some optimism about the recent climate legislation, and that's twofold, the carbon pricing legislation and the Net Zero Act. So it is much better than nothing. If climate initiatives are just set out in non-binding policies that can come and go, that's a much worse scenario than having some elements set in legislation. Now, there's no consequences to not meeting a target in this legislation, so there's been criticism about that. But it's certainly better to have interim objectives, targets that are soon enough that drive change, as opposed to being too far off to worry people, and for there to be accountability mechanisms like our role. So the minimum in the Act was for us to report by the end of 2024 and again in 2029. But given Canada's track record, I indicated that no, I'd like to start early, given that there appeared to be problems with the first plan under the Act. So we've decided to move early, and we're going to keep reporting until, as I mentioned earlier, the tide starts to turn.
Thank you. We were looking at 5-year intervals. I think we started with 2025 and 2030, 2035, 40. Are we now still on a 5-year interval, or do you think we might see something sooner than 5 years?
So the plans are on a 5-year interval, and there'll be actually a new target for 2035 fairly soon. And hopefully we don't forget about meeting the 2030 target, because the 2035 target has come in its place. We have to meet all of them, including the objective in 2026, the target in 2035, and the next target in 2030 and 2035. But with respect to our office, we're going to report more frequently than the legislation requires. So we're going to lead by example, getting this report out 13 months early, putting out the next report well before 2029, because essentially Canada's track record doesn't inspire confidence. So we are going to keep on discharging our accountability role more frequently until we see the results coming in that are more positive.
Thank you. And I think since 1990, or between 1990 and just a few years ago, we had no act in place. We had no accountability. We made promises, but we didn't follow up in terms of the federal government, particularly the conservative federal government, of course, I'll say. But I think any government needs accountability. Maybe Mr. Gouin, could you comment on how is this helping the department in terms of its own accountability?
Thank you for the question. The Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act received royal assent in June 2021. It sets an accountability cycle that we need to continuously set progressive greenhouse gas emissions target. The next one will be 2035, one for 2040, one for 2045, and the target needs to be established 10 years in advance, supported by a climate plan that will provide measures to draw a credible pathway to meet those targets. And in addition, there will be...
That was, in addition, won't be able to make it, so that's over.
In writing would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Longfield. So, Madame Posé for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Earlier, I talked about measures that don't exist yet, and now I'd like to focus on technologies that don't exist. So, according to the model, certain technologies necessary to reduce emissions would be available soon, and the modeling seemed to indicate that carbon capture technologies would be able to stock 27 megatons by 2030. And I'd like us to remember that figure. So experts told the government that the technologies for capture of carbon were leading edge, but that's not true. They're expensive, they're not efficient, and at the moment, maybe in 10, 15 years' time that will be. But they came to Parliament and told this to the committee. The experts wrote this in reviews. Dozens of scientists have said this and written to the Prime Minister's office. The Bloc Québécois has been repeating this to the government for 2 years now, and the government decided to give billions of dollars to the oil companies so that they use this technology rather than investing in renewable energy. So 83 billion to those companies by 2035, but our target is for 2035 rather, and the current target is 2030. So, perhaps you, Ms. O'Brien, could say, how could the government account this in its reductions plan by 2030, despite all of the warnings that scientists have and researchers have told them? Not only are these technologies inefficient, expensive, and even if they existed, the facilities would never be able to cope with the projections for 2030. So how has the government been able to do this?
Thank you very much for the question. While I came prepared to speak more to the ZEBIT program today, with respect to technologies and questions regarding emissions reductions in the oil and gas sector, it's true that the sector is the largest emitting sector in Canada. Absolute emissions have increased, although I would also indicate that emissions intensity for the sector has been decreasing over a number of years. That is also
Over there.
largely due to the adoption of technologies.
Sorry to the witness, but we got to keep strict with these times or it gets run over. If you wanted to table any information on that, would that be acceptable, Madam
C'est ce que j'allais demander, Monsieur le Président.
That's what I was going to ask, Mr. Chairman, that they could send that information to the committee. Thank you.
Ms. Brown? Thank you. So, Mr. Bachrach, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the pieces of the report from the Environment Commissioner that I keyed in on was this statement around fragmented action by agencies not directly accountable to the Minister of Environment. And I think this really underscores a systemic problem that needs to be addressed if we're to get back on track. Now, one thing that happened in British Columbia around 2008 under the Gordon Campbell government was that when he committed the province to broad climate action, he created a climate action secretariat in the Premier's office that was in charge of overseeing and directing climate actions throughout all of the provincial ministries. And I wonder, Mr. DeMarco, if you could provide some comments on whether that kind of governance change, administrative change, could help achieve the kind of acceleration that you're talking about in your report that we need in order to get on track to meet the 2030 target.
Yes, I'd be pleased to. So we talk about that in this report, and also it's one of the lessons learned in our 2021 report in terms of the need for better coordination and leadership. So it's not for us to prescribe a specific avenue to address this, but we can point out that with 30 years of using a fragmented approach has not achieve the results that we are hoping for. So it's up to the Government of Canada to look at whether some sort of model that centralizes accountabilities, better coordinates accountabilities, increases powers for one department that has responsibility. There's a number of different approaches, but a decentralized, fragmented approach has shown to be ineffective so far in 30 years. So we have to try something new because we can't just expect different results from the same old approach.
And to be clear, that fragmented approach that you just described is the current approach. That's the state of affairs when it comes to climate action in the federal government.
Largely, there are now, and perhaps Treasury Board can assist in answering this question. There is now more coordination than previously, but it is very limited.
Thank you.
And on to Mr. Leslie for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, officials. I'd like to go back to this question of a third of emissions reductions by 2030 being accounted to under the carbon tax. Mr. Jimenez, when you said that, you didn't sound terribly confident. And I'm curious, Commissioner, have you seen the department's economic modeling? You deferred to them on the question of what the valuation expected in reductions is from the carbon tax. Have you been shared all the modeling documentation by the department?
We've had some documentation shared with us, but we wouldn't have a recommendation seeking more transparency if we felt that we were receiving enough. So there is, this plan definitely is better than previous plans in that it has more disclosure of assumptions, more details in it, sector by sector objectives. So that's better than before, but it's not good enough in terms of the level of transparency that our office expects and that I believe Canadians expect, given that they haven't been achieving results to date. If they were constantly meeting targets And it was just, a track record of success after success. There may not be as much of a need for that information, but given the track record is so poor, then shining a light on the information behind these projections can only help them be better scrutinized and improved and course corrected before it's too late. So we are recommending greater transparency in the modeling and the assumptions.
Yeah, I appreciate that when you say you found a lack of reliability and transparency in economic and emission modeling. So I'm wondering for the department, why is there a inability, lack of desire to share that with the commissioner for his, and would you be willing to table all of the economic and emissions modeling that's been undertaken for the carbon tax scheme thus far to the committee for us to review, and then perhaps share with the commissioner for his next report?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for the question. In my response, Chair, I was just citing the uncertainty and the difficulty around disentangling the impacts of the carbon price from the other measures. That's all. So we do have an estimate, but it's highly uncertain how all the different measures interact with each other.
And understanding it's difficult to measure these intangibles, it seems concerning to me that a marquee policy for the government really has no confident guess even as to what the emissions reductions are going to be in terms of our overall objectives. Is this not concerning that we don't have a clear idea of what we're going to accomplish based on what is a sound theoretical practice, but with the way we've seen it applied, particularly in rural areas across this country, and the discontent that it has led to for many Canadians who are struggling with housing and heating and grocery poverty at this point? Is it not concerning maybe to the commissioner that we don't have that transparency and that level of accountability? Commissioner?
So it is a concern, and that's why recommendation 84 is there about making substantive information available, publicly available, not just to our office, but to the public. There was a question earlier from Mr. Bachrach, I believe, about sectors accounting for the most increases in emissions since 1990, and oil and gas is one of those. This plan says oil and gas emissions are going to go down 31%, even though they've been rising from 1990 to now by 80 to 90%. That's a critical piece of information in the plan, that they're expecting a significant drop and that the trend line is going to reverse course. We would like to know exactly how they got there, and I'm sure members of the committee would like to know how they got to that 31%, because if they don't address the biggest sector in terms of emissions in a way that they can show their work in terms of getting there, then Canadians will not have confidence in the plan. So that's why I think transparency, an increase in transparency will not only help in bringing more rigor to the process, but it'll also help the department in convincing Canadians that it is adding value and that they're getting value for money for all of these measures that do cost people money, that cost industry money, and they cost government money. So let's see what the show your work in terms of the.
I agree. Thank you, Commissioner. I'll cede the remaining time to my colleague George Daltel.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to table the following motion. Given that the Prime Minister's temporary and limited exemption to the carbon tax on home heating does not apply to 97% of Canadians, and that this announcement exposes major inconsistencies in the federal carbon tax policy, and that the Liberal government voted against the Conservative motion to extend the same exemption to all forms of home heating in Canada, and that Canada's premiers have issued a joint statement that says, and I'm quoting, premiers expressed concern that federal actions around the carbon tax have treated Canadians differently and expect the federal government to support all Canadians fairly. Close quote. And given the divisive statement made by the Minister of Rural Economic Development when she stated, in response to a televised interview question on whether the Liberals were considering carbon tax relief for Canadians outside of Atlantic Canada, quote, perhaps they need to elect more Liberals in the prairies so that we can have that conversation as well, close quote. The committee undertake a 10-meeting review of carbon tax policy in Canada, given the Prime Minister's limited carbon tax exemption, calls from provinces and Canadians struggling with the affordability crisis to remove the federal carbon tax completely, and the committee hear from the Minister of the Environment for 2 hours, the Minister of Finance for 2 hours, the Minister of Natural Resources for 2 hours, the Minister of Industry for 2 hours, the Minister and all other witnesses the committee deems relevant, and that the committee extend existing meeting times by one order in order to prioritize this motion, and that the committee report its findings to the House. B, urge the Minister of Rural Economic Development to appear for 2 hours on November 21st, 2023 to explain her comments. So this motion, Mr. Chairman, that we're tabling today intends to get to the bottom of things. We've seen that with the reports tabled recently that the carbon tax policy, and it's this spearheaded initiative by this government, but it's not meeting its goals. So we're always missing our goals. So we have to get to the bottom of things and understand why this financial approach is not achieving its goals. So that's why, Mr. Chairman, if we're going to do a good and rigorous work on carbon tax, we should do it here at this committee.
I got Mr. Cram next on the speaking list, then Mr. Leslie, Mr. Van Couverden, and Ms. Roy.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I would like to thank my colleague, Monsieur Deltel, for moving this very important motion. So the Government of Canada is supposed to look out for the interests of all Canadians, regardless of where they live. That's true when it comes to environmental issues, that's true when it comes to taxation issues, that's true for any other issue. So when a Minister of the Crown says publicly on television that she will not listen to the people of a particular region because of the party for which they voted in the previous election, that is very concerning, and it raises the question,
Point of order, Mr.
what
Chair.
other...
I believe Mr. Cram is taking the minister's comments completely out of context in the purpose of this motion. I question its relevance.
He's got the floor. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. Not really a point of order. So the minister's comments certainly are concerning, and it raises the question: what other government policies are enacted solely based on how a particular region voted in the previous election? So I think it is very reasonable to invite Minister Hutchings to the committee to explain her comments. Thank you.
Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think it's a timely motion, given the testimony we were just hearing from the Commissioner
Point of order,
on the...
Mr. Chair. Sorry, I was watching the order of the hands go up, and actually...
Debate. We've got the order. I announced it. I saw everybody.
Well, I'm challenging that.
You'll have your time.
I'm challenging the order. I saw Mr. Van Couverden's hand go up at the same time as Mr. Cram's.
We had it here. We have two lists. They both correspond. So...
Well, perhaps you were looking to that side and not this side.
I'm not going to call the clerk into question. So, I mean, like, we're both here. That's why there's two of us here. So we're watching the whole table. So on you go, Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I was saying, I think it's a very timely motion to bring forward. And I mean, just last week we had the Bank of Canada governor admit that the carbon tax is responsible for 16% of our total food inflation in this country. And as my colleague...
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Oh.
It's 0.6%.
8?
That's not a point of order.
Not a point of order. Yes, it does. It does matter a lot, actually. Point of orders are supposed to be point of orders, not debates. So it does matter a lot. Thank you. Mr. Leslie.
As I was saying, I think, as my colleague just mentioned, the premiers in this country, not often are they all aligned, but they are all aligned right now in the disdain for the federal government picking and choosing people in certain parts of the country for political reasons to give them a break on the carbon tax. And when the minister has the gall to say that people in the prairies, well, if they want to get considered for a pause, perhaps they should have elected more Liberals, is galling. She's been awfully quiet since then. I think it is a perfect opportunity to bring her and several other ministers before this committee to discuss the entirety of the policy, particularly given the evidence as provided by the Environment Commissioner in terms of the lack of transparency and of reliability and transparency in economic and emission modeling. I think it's time that we hold the decision makers of this policy to account and those that are dividing Canadians time and time again. Have them come before the committee, and I hope all members will pass this motion today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Leslie. Mr. Van Couverton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to adjourn debate on this motion.
Okay. It's a recorded vote, right?
So the motion is to adjourn debate.
So just to set that clear, like, so the speakers list stops automatically and then we would automatically go into a straight vote. So the others won't have their say. Okay, good. Thank you.
Madame Chatel? Mr. Longfield?
Approve.
Ms. Taylor-Roy?
Bien sûr.
Mr. Van Couverton? Mr. Weiler?
In favor.
Monsieur Datel?
Contre.
Mr. Cram?
Opposed.
Mr. Leslie?
Opposed.
Monsieur Gascon?
C'est Garon, mais c'est problématique parce qu'il y a un Gascon près
That's problematic because there's a Mr. Gascon who sits near me, but my name is Garon and I vote against this.
Mr. Backrack?
Yes, in favor.
Six yeas.
So it's defeated. Okay, so there you go. Thank you very much, everyone. Continuing that on swiftly. So we, Mr. Leslie, you have 15 seconds left. I guess and you hand it over to Mr. Datel. So then, Mr. Datel, you have 15 seconds left if you want.
On va peut-être faire plus une déclaration.
I might make a statement more. I've asked a lot of questions on electric vehicles, and I'm proud to say that I own one. I bought it used, and I'm very proud of it.
There we go. Thank you. And now we go to Ms. Chatel. Liz.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I didn't want to get into this debate, but I will do so because Canadians are going to have two clear choices when the time comes, either to continue to fight against climate change or go back to the Stone Age on climate change, rather. So we can see with the Paris Agreement, we can see economically what's happening. And I want to talk about the economic impact and the reduction of greenhouse gases thanks to the carbon tax policy. So the great economies of the world, we've talked a lot about this at the OECD, and we have seen carbon taxes, places like California, for example, Canada, of course, the UK and Europe are moving forward with these policies. So you were saying earlier that this accounts for 1/3 of greenhouse gas reductions here in Canada. I was reading a study on the effective rate and this was from the OECD, and it mentioned, perhaps my colleagues would be interested in hearing this, that this data, the fact was that 73% of reductions in the UK in the energy sector, the electric sector, is because of their carbon taxing. So there is data, and we're not very erudite on the other side of the house on this issue, perhaps, but they just want to simply do away with the primary policy that helps us make a transition towards a new economy. So in simple terms, Mr. DeMarco, can you say how we use these economic levers for Canadians who perhaps aren't very well aware of the mechanisms? Well, I can begin, but it's not really up to me to defend a decision of choosing one policy or another. So I will ask the department to elaborate on that. But I can say, as I said earlier, in English, that the theory of carbon taxing and the internalization of an economic externalities is something that is well understood by economists and experts. Even the Supreme Court of Canada has spoken on this, but it needs to be at a high enough level and with an application across the country in order to have an effect on climate change and all Canadians. But perhaps the department could explain a little more on this subject. Well, my time is quite short, so I have another very important question I want to ask. You are using the comparison of the G7, and I like that. I like to use international comparisons. But I'm wondering about the choice of 90 because we started really climate action in 2015, but Canada has demonstrated over the last 2 years the most significant reduction emissions level of all of the G7 countries. So do you attribute this reduction comparatively that shows Canada in a much better light? What do you attribute that to? Well, it's obvious that since 1990, or whether it's from 2005, Canada has been lagging behind the other 6 G7 countries, and there's a graph on this in our report. It shows what the situation is. So we can see that it's possible to decrease emissions because we see other countries are doing that. And then they're not identical to Canada, but they are democracies like ours is, and they have advanced industry, so it's possible. Yes. So I know that from 2005, it's the year that's most important. I'm sorry, Mr. DeMarco, I have little time. I'm talking about the last 2 years. Oh, the last 2 years. Okay. Well, I'm more confident in seeing the curve over a longer period of time, because if we look at just 2 years with COVID, for example, it becomes really difficult to assess the impact of the measures on the economy. So the curve over 10, 15 years, 30 years, it's not the same thing. Well, we're making progress, aren't we?
Way over. 45 seconds over. So, okay, but thank you. And if there's anything there that can be tabled, Ms. Chattel, do you want anything brought forward to the committee?
If possible, to explain those factors for the progress we've made over the last 2 years, yes, please. I cannot say that I can explain that because we don't have enough transparency with the data. So if someone can explain that to you, it would be the department, not me.
For that clarification. So we're going to go on to our next round, and Mr. Deltel for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and always a pleasure to talk to you again, Mr. DeMarco. Dans le rapport, ce qui ressort le
In the report, what we see the most is that by 2030, once again, Canada won't meet its goals. You're using quite severe language to address that reality. You talk about overly optimistic hypotheses, uncertainties, lack of review, inconsistent information, delays, and the lack of reliability. So that's evidence that over time we can't say that this government has distinguished itself with the rigorousness of its work. How can we explain that after 8 years we can't have reliable sources of information as the some people around the table claim here? Well, I can't explain why the department has chosen to not publish more information on the efficiency and effectiveness of measures. But I can say that our office has written a series of reports, many before my tenure as commissioner, where we were seeking more transparency and information on these suppositions and the measures taken, and that's why we have made these recommendations. And there are answers that are pointing us in the right direction, I believe, if the departmental actions are in line with their answers. But we would have more transparency than we've had up until the date, and I hope that will be the case. 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister made an announcement that upset all of the premiers across the country, as well as many environmental groups, and it also set the pigeons among people. So what do you think of that answer? Well, it came after the conclusion of our audit, so we didn't do an analysis of that answer. We don't. We don't know how they're going to meet the targets. We don't know if there was an analysis of the equity of this measure. We don't know if there was an assessment of what this signals to the private sector in terms of their confidence in carbon taxes. And I'd like to see that analysis before I publish the report next year, but we haven't said anything now because this is very recent. It was after the conclusion of our audit. Well, that's the reason why we tabled a motion in order to get to the bottom of things, but unfortunately others don't wish to get to the bottom of it. So, Mr. Commissioner, you talked about the DFO. You said that they didn't manage to get a hold of reliable data on catches, and they're not aware of the health of stocks in Canada. The department needs to increase its monitoring and improve it. So, Mr. Chairman, I think we've been fishing in Canada forever. And so how is it that after 8 years this government isn't able to get basic information from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans? Well, we're very disappointed that we'd be obliged to bring the subject up again because it's the same recommendations we made in the last audit. Yes, Canada's been managing fisheries since Confederation, and there are many years of history there. Also, there are a lot of effects. There's the cod fishery that collapsed, but we've lost at least 10 species of fish in Canada that are now extinct. And those populations, according to the COSEWIC definition. So we need modernization. We can't keep doing the same thing that we've done in the past. But there again, there's nothing new here. We're not talking about new technologies here. We're talking about identifying the number of fish that are caught and the species that exist. That is the main job of the department. How come they're not doing it? Well, I can't explain that. That's the conclusion of our report, that they need to do that. And we've made our recommendations to them. They told them to improve their systems. Why have they not done so far? Given that we had an audit on the same issue, or almost exactly the same one, is a question you'd have to ask of the department.
On to Mr. Wheeler. Online.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also want to thank Commissioner DeMarco for his work, and particularly for tabling this early, given the urgency of acting on climate change. Mr. Longfield mentioned earlier some of the numbers we're seeing in take-up in electric vehicles across Canada, with almost 21% in BC and almost 18.5% in Quebec. And while there's 7 provinces in Canada that have corresponding incentives to get electric vehicles, British Columbia has an electric vehicle or zero emissions vehicle mandate, as does Quebec. And I think it's one of the reasons why Monsieur Detel and myself are able to get electric vehicles. So, Commissioner DeMarco, I was hoping you could explain to our committee what type of an impact do you see a zero emissions vehicle mandate across Canada having in reducing our emissions from our second largest source, which is, of course, transportation?
Yes. So as we indicate in our report 8, oil and gas and transportation together account for 50% of the emissions in Canada, the anthropogenic emissions. So 28% for oil and gas and 22% for transportation. And within that 22%, 51% of the 22 is for light duty vehicles. So that's a big chunk of emissions that can be addressed in one measure or a suite of measures for zero emission vehicles. So it is a very important suite of measures to pursue in terms of bringing down emissions in the transportation sector, which is the second biggest. You can see the effect of incentives in Exhibit 8.4 of Report 8. You see that Quebec has a fleet size of over 100,000 zero-emission vehicles already. 45% of the whole fleet in Canada is in Quebec, even though Quebec's population is only 22%. So you can see that, and then similarly with BC, you see a very high number of zero-emission vehicles compared to its actual population. So you do see leadership in those provinces paying off with the actual switchover from traditional vehicles to zero-emission vehicles.
Thank you. And earlier this year, there was an opinion shared by the Supreme Court of Canada on the constitutionality of the Impact Assessment Act. And Commissioner DeMarco, do you believe that this ruling will hamper the government's approach to impact assessments? And do you think that it has implications for building the infrastructure necessary for us to get to our emissions reduction goals?
So in terms of the impact of the ruling on reaching the emissions reduction goals, I guess I'll pretend I'm in my previous role as an environmental adjudicator at the federal and provincial level rather than in the audit office. But there's no question that carbon pricing which is one of the signature pieces, is constitutional under national concern doctrine, and that was the recent decision from the Supreme Court about that. And there's no question that pollution regulation is valid under the criminal law power in terms of regulations relating to contaminants under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. That's from the Hydro-Quebec case. 1997, I'm thinking. Well, someone can check that later to make sure that's right. So the signature pieces, carbon pricing and regulation under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, already upheld by the Supreme Court. So the recent decision on the Impact Assessment Act would have no impact on those two pieces, which are the big ticket items. Will that ruling have an effect on impact assessment? Yes, that was what the decision was about. So the federal role in impact assessment will have to abide by the delineation of jurisdiction set out in the recent Supreme Court ruling that was issued.
Thank you. And you mentioned in your report that you found that the department was planning to update its methodology for calculating historical emissions data for the coming inventory report in 2024. I was hoping you could maybe speak a little bit more to this and what type of changes that you see as necessary.
Very briefly, or if you want to table something.
Yes, so we have a recommendation about speeding up the availability of emissions information. If it's a priority, like economic issues are a priority, we can get faster information. We give examples of countries in Europe where they can turn around data on this. There's always going to be some uncertainty. Canada is still going back and correcting data from previous years because it's not like counting widgets. Emissions are a little harder to get a handle on, but we do recommend that they work on this in a more timely manner and especially improve their data on methane and land use change and forestry.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, sir.
Oui, Monsieur le Président. Alors, puisque Monsieur Wheeler.
Thank you. Since Mr. Whalen used my argument, I'd like to clarify some things that I said earlier. So, indeed, I am the owner of a 100% electric vehicle, and it's a used one. And why did I say that earlier? It's because it demonstrates that I didn't get any subsidy for that. Because he's mentioned that, I just wanted to clarify.
Thank you. Mr. Dehill. Mr. Garon, for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Angun, the Commissioner said it politely, but what he's saying is that the Canadian emissions strategy is based on science fiction. And that science fiction is carbon storage and capture and storage technologies, rather, that many people before the committee told us would not be ready for 2030, many researchers, and that we would never be able to store 27 megatons a year with that. Now, what's really worrisome in this is that your strategy relies on this, and if researchers are telling us that this won't work, you're about pretty much certain to fail by 2030. So who's telling the truth? The researchers who appeared before the committee, or is this science that's been done behind the closed doors of your department?
Thank you very much for the question. First of all, I think that Mr. Hermanitz has indicated the fact that the emissions reduction plan has a robust mix of policy instruments. There are different technologies that will be spurred, accelerated, invested in order to help us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There are different sectors that the emissions reduction plan targets in order to help move the yardstick. In the building sector, we are trying to help increase affordability, but at the same time make households to accelerate the adoption of more energy efficient equipment.
Je me permettrai, Monsieur le
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I allow myself to interrupt here. Researchers who came and appeared before the committee, and you've read the reports, told us that these technologies will never fulfill the promise by 2030. So are these people right or wrong? That's not a complex question. Won't take a long time to answer.
Talked about the modeling. It takes into account uncertainty and interacting factors. And also, investment in one technology does not represent the whole of the climate plan. That being said, I don't know if Mr. Hermanitz would like to add.
I can speak to that from the modeling perspective. We look at the academic literature that's out there around energy and environment economy modeling. We consult with provinces and territories and other departments, other federal departments, in coming up with the assumptions that we use in the modeling.
To Mr. Bachrach for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. DeMarco, you mentioned something when we were talking about the contribution of reductions in the oil and gas sector to the overall emissions reductions plan, and I think it had to do with the inability of the department to show their homework when it comes to that number, the 30% contribution. Could you talk just very briefly about what information was missing? It seems like there's a bottom-up approach you can take to these kinds of sectoral targets, and there's a top-down approach that's more aspirational, that basically says to make the rest of the math work, the oil and gas sector has to contribute at least 30%, so let's put that 30% number in there and hope and pray that we can come up with some things to backfill it so that we actually reach it. Which of those approaches does it seem that the department took?
So I'm going to rely on Principal Kim Leach to address that. It's a technical area involving bottom-up and backcasting and so on. So, Ms. Leach?
Yes, thank you for the question. And yes, so in the emission reduction plan, the government talks about how it took a hybrid approach of modeling a hybrid approach. So it used backcasting, which is what the 31% number is from.
I'm not sure I understand backcasting. So they looked at the reductions the industry has managed to achieve in the past and said 30% is easily achievable.
Yeah.
Is that what they said?
So our mandate is to look at the measures in the plan. So we looked at the modeling that was done for the measures. The backcasting is done to look at, to set a point in the future at 2030, and then to look at pathways that might be possible to achieve that. So both are important aspects. But the 31%, the number that we talked about in our work here, that is the number that the oil and gas sector is to contribute, the emission reductions that sector will contribute by 2030. So that's a very important number, and we could not we could not determine where that number came from.
Okay,
We
that's
could
what I wanted to
determine
get
no
at.
analysis.
That,
Yeah.
That's the homework that's missing. So, Mr. Hermanitz, I'm wondering if that homework exists and whether you could table it with the committee so we can better understand that 31% contribution of the oil and gas industry to the overall emissions reduction.
Quick answer. Can you
let my
table that?
colleague,
Right.
answer.
We can table that information?
So during the audit process, we have provided all the information that the commissioner and his office has requested. That being said, a lot of the information actually pertain to cabinet deliberation, and therefore we have followed the Canada Evidence Act. But
I think it was a
provided-
pretty simple question. Can you provide the information?
So
or not?
I think the answer is that he can't because the government is keeping the information secret. So we'll be asking the government to provide that secret information so we can better understand how they came up with these aspirational numbers that have nothing behind them. So I thank Mr. Nguyen for his response. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beckert. Mr. Cram, for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to all the witnesses for being here. Mr. DeMarco, I'd like to follow up with some of the questions that I asked in my first round of questioning. So we've established that it's the goal of the federal government to have 80% of its vehicles as zero emission by the end of the decade, and we established that right now we're still in the single digits, as is the general population of the country. And so I asked a question about the carbon tax, and your answer was that the carbon tax theory is sound. I would like to go a step beyond that into practice. I wonder if you could, help us understand how high does the carbon tax have to go before the government starts meeting some of its goals? Are we talking $1 a liter or $2 a liter or $3 a liter in carbon tax before we start achieving some of these targets?
So I can't give you an answer for that's specific to when people feel confident enough that it's worth their while to switch. The carbon levy is escalating, $15 per year to 2030. For different people, it'll affect people differently. When one person is ready to say, okay, I think it's worth my while, given I just commute, but I don't do long distance travel, they may arrive at that decision earlier, especially if there's a provincial incentive program in there. So I can't say what the number has to be to switch over everyone. It'll differ amongst provinces and amongst people. But it does have to be high enough so that the math works out, that someone will say, okay, it makes sense for me to do the switch. It's more costly for me to use an internal combustion car than it is an electric vehicle. But the exact price point, especially since it changes every year because it's escalating, it's too hard to say. There may be some modeling, year-by-year modeling that Environment Canada has about that. It would be quite different between, say, BC and Ontario, or Quebec and Ontario, but I don't know if they do have that.
Yes, I'd be happy to hear from the department, please.
With respect to the zero-emission vehicles you're referring to?
Let's start with that. To get to 80% of zero-emission vehicles for the federal government and the population at large, how high does the carbon tax have to go?
Well, like my colleague said, we're not the carbon pricing leads within the department, so we can follow up on that. I'd also be happy to table Mr. Chair, the RIAZ cost-benefit analysis for the zero emissions vehicle sales mandate. And with respect to federal government targets, I'll turn to my colleague Aaron O'Brien.
Okay, so then maybe I'll come back to Mr. DeMarco with the issue identified on page 11, where the zero emission vehicles includes trucks that need to pull loads for long periods of time and vehicles that need to work in harsh weather conditions. I can't imagine, any increase in the carbon tax that would make up for these technologies that do not yet exist. And so does it really matter how high the carbon tax goes? If the department can't switch to electric vehicles that are capable of towing certain loads or electric vehicles that are able to work in harsh weather conditions, then what does it matter how high the carbon tax goes?
So there's impacts on the behavior of consumers in terms of choice of vehicles, but there's also impact on the market and manufacturers. So if there's certainty of the carbon price going up, there'll be an acceleration under economic theory in research and development and bringing to market new products such as 3/4 ton trucks or 1 ton trucks that we don't have right now. So it's not just a consumer, it's not just incenting behavior change in the consumer, it also is incenting behavior change in the market. For them to meet their target on the fleet, knowing that those specialty vehicles are not available yet, all the more important that for light vehicles, they switch over now because they're going to have to wait until later in the 7-year cycle to see if the technology is there for the bigger trucks.
To Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here and to the Commissioner for doing this report earlier than was necessary. I think we all take this very seriously. I'm encouraged to see how much we are doing, and I know we're falling short of our goals, but we have made a lot of progress. And I appreciate the discussion about the pollution pricing mechanism. And I would actually ask whether there is some kind of primer on pollution pricing that you might also submit to the committee, because there seems to be a great deal of understanding about how this mechanism works and what its impact can be. Because this doesn't work in isolation. This works in conjunction with, obviously, many other factors. And speaking of the factors, we were talking about the delineation of jurisdictions. And when we look at comparing Canada to the other G7 countries, and the percentage of our economy that is reliant on oil and gas, we see that one of the reasons I believe that Canada has not done as well as other countries is because the oil and gas sector is a large part of our economy and has not made any emissions reductions. So technology like CCUS, other programs, we often hear from the oil and gas sector that they are working on plans to decarbonize, that they're going to be bringing down their emissions and that there's no need to reduce production. I was wondering if you could comment on that, and in particular, the Pathways Alliance. I've heard a lot about them. They're advertised all over Ottawa. Have you seen any particular plans from the Pathway Alliance or what they're doing and anything they've actually done to reduce emissions in the oil and gas industry?
So we audit the federal government, not the private sector. So it's up to the federal government to make sure the math adds up in terms of all of the sectors reaching the target for 2030. It hasn't been the case in the previous plans. They haven't reached the targets, even though, as has been noted today, the efficiency or carbon intensity has improved markedly over the years. So Canada does need to get a handle on that. I mean, it's not the only country in the G7 that had a large fossil extraction footprint in 1992 when the Rio Convention was signed. Germany and the UK also, as well as the US, obviously, had large fossil energy extraction industries. They're all down since 1990, but Canada is up. So these are choices that are made.
Okay, thank you very much. And I wanted to go back to the delineation of jurisdictions. We talked about the impact assessment and the fact that we don't have the ability to do as much, perhaps, as we did before. But when provinces are not working in the same direction as the federal government, and I take the great concern the Conservatives have here on electric vehicles, for example. In Ontario, when I bought my first electric vehicle, there was an incentive from the provincial government, I think under the Liberal government of Kathleen Wynne, to purchase these. And of course, that, in addition to other things, incentivizes people to change their behavior. We've just seen Danielle Smith in Alberta put a freeze on wind and solar projects. How much do you think the willingness of the provinces to align with the climate goals as well are impacting our ability to meet our emissions targets?
So the Chief Justice, and I think it's the last paragraph of the impact assessment decision that just released, talks about cooperative federalism, which I think is what you're getting at.
Yep.
He also talks about in the first paragraph the fundamental value of the environment and the right of Canadians to a safe environment. So the jurisdiction is shared in Canada. So there needs to be work done within the spheres of jurisdiction at the federal level, at the provincial level, at the municipal level, and with Indigenous communities as well. For carbon pricing and for regulation of greenhouse gas pollution, those are clearly within the federal realm, and the federal government does not have to worry about the effect of the Impact Assessment Act decision on their signature pieces in terms of climate change mitigation measures.
Okay, thank you. And you see the price on pollution as one of those signature pieces of our platform, of our program.
Yeah, so I characterize it as one of the big ticket items along with regulation, but as you mentioned, there are others like incentives or subsidies. I believe the department roughly estimates that pollution pricing is going to account for 1/3 of the reductions that they're seeking.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And on to the next round. So we've got, just so everybody knows, we're entering the next round. It might go a little bit by, but instead of lowering everybody's time, if everybody's got time to agrees to it, we'll just keep on going with the regular times. So it'll be Mr. Leslie, Mr. Van Couverton, Mr. Garon, Mr. Backrack.
No, could we actually lower the times like we normally do when we go into the next round?
Well, this way's, I guess,
You just ask
this
for
is a lot easier. Everybody's here, so we just keep on doing with the regular times. What would be the advantage of?
We're doing one more round with the normal time.
Normal times. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. I think it's important that we have the provinces and the federal government working together, and I think that's why it's so interesting that all of the provinces enunciated their concern that the federal government's decision on changing the carbon taxation scheme. But I'd like to get back to the questions. I understand you guys aren't from the carbon tax branch. I'm still perplexed, and I think most people on this side of the table have tried to decipher why on earth this modeling, economic and emissions reduction modeling, is being hidden under cabinet confidence. Usually cabinet confidence has been used in the past for SNC-Lavalin scandals, ArriveCan scandals. And so I'm curious why the department is so unwilling to put forward what doesn't seem to be in our any of our competitors' interest in knowing this information. It doesn't seem like there should be a real good reason why we can't see, why the commissioner can't see the full set of data to better understand how we're going to get the 30% or 40% reduction by 2030. And have a full understanding of what the economic modeling is. So I guess my question to the department is, could we ask you to go ask your colleagues why this is the case, send a letter back to our committee, or what I assume will be a fairly significant dump of information for us to review? Because I think, as the recommendation for the commissioner said, transparency and reliability of this data is very important. And given the fact his office is unable to get it, I think it's reason for concern for all members of this committee and all Canadians to know why this is the case.
Thank you for the question. So a few things. Number one, I can turn to Mr. Hermanitz to talk about the availability of the information. As you know that every year there is an update on the greenhouse gas emissions projections on an annual basis. And also on a biannual basis, we submit to the UNFCCC a report on the progress of Canada's greenhouse gas emission reduction. And that includes projection, subject to peer review. The third part is we did provide all the information as requested by the Office of the Commissioner, including specific reference to one piece of information that they were looking for, but at the same time, that particular piece of information, not all the data, but one specific piece that is subject to cabinet confidence pursuant to Section 29 of the Canada Evidence Act.
Is that a fair statement, Commissioner?
So we only receive the information that they disclose. It's not like a court that receives the information in confidence and assesses whether the blacked out information was properly blacked out or not. But we have no reason to believe that they were inappropriately withholding information that was found somewhere else and not just in a cabinet confidence. We take them at their word that this information was in a cabinet confidence. But that's a choice of the government to have the information only housed there. So what we're saying is, in the spirit of transparency, make more information publicly available and to us, and essentially revisit the choice as to where information that's important for Canadians in terms of accountability is housed. We aren't saying that the information was improperly redacted or anything like that. We're saying that the choice that was made to have it only in the Cabinet confidence and nowhere else reduces the transparency and accountability, and that's why that recommendation is in there, and it's been agreed to, recommendation 84.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I think for a government that promised to be open by default, we've seen a bit of a trend line away from that here. And I think it's entirely reasonable that you make that suggestion. I'm just going to switch over to the fisheries audit number 9 on the catch data not being dependable and timely in the Commissioner's opinion. Given this reality and some of our struggles, I think, between the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and our fisheries communities and fishermen themselves, is there a concern that generally speaking, our fishery stocks are not being well managed due to this lack of data available to the department or being found by the department?
So there's a risk regarding the sustainability of the management. We had hoped to look at both the quality of the information base, that is the monitoring data, and how it's used to good effect to sustain fisheries. But because we encountered so many of the same problems that we had seen 7 years ago, the report focuses mainly on trying to tidy up the information base so that they have the information available that is dependable and timely that will help ensure the sustainability of the stock. So it's going to take that step of filling in these gaps in the information basis before we can confidently assess one way or another whether the stocks are being sustainably managed or not. We didn't see any problems with the use of the information that they had. So regardless of its limitations, they weren't looking at information and then deciding to set quotas that were too high regardless. So they were using the information they had properly. Our problem, the problem that we identified in the report is the quality of that information, not the use of it.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Leslie, and on to Mr. Van Couverden for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 5 minutes, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I'd share a little bit of time with Ms. Chattel towards the end, if you wouldn't mind letting me know when I'm up to about 3 minutes. I'd like to focus a little bit on provincial jurisdiction, and since it's come up a couple of times, I also drive an electric car. I live in Ontario, so I received a federal subsidy, but not a provincial one. It was a long wait for my car, and there isn't a used EV car market in Ontario because we have so few EVs, and that's a direct relationship with our province's removal of the subsidy for EVs and for zero emissions vehicles. And I'm glad that Mr. Deltel was able to obtain a used vehicle in his province, but it was directly because there is a used EV market in Quebec due to the fact they have so many subsidized vehicles. Now, focusing just a little bit on provincial jurisdiction, I'm curious to know if anybody has any insight on this. In a sort of an alternate universe where provinces were more ambitious, Canada is a federation and we share jurisdiction in many areas. I'd like to also highlight that we're not talking about a redoubling or a tripling of our efforts to get to 40%, projected to be around 34. We need to tweak. We need to increase our ambition. We need to go faster and go harder. It's not a matter of doubling or tripling our things. What role do the provinces and territories play in things like EV subsidies? That's kind of low-hanging fruit. What else could they be doing to achieve these targets together?
Do you want me to address that?
That'd be great. Thank you.
Having conducted an audit at the provincial level in my previous work as well, I can speak to that in part. So it's a whole of society issue to address climate change as the related biodiversity crisis. So those are whole of society crises that need to be addressed. So it's not only all levels of government, but it's also individuals and the private sector that all have to do their part in addressing these if we are actually going to succeed, not just hitting a target, which is sort of, which is important, but more importantly, averting the worst effects of climate change and biodiversity loss. So Provinces can do a lot in both the climate area and the biodiversity area, given the division of powers under the Constitution, and local municipalities can play a part as well. On issues of international or national concern, such as the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, it's incumbent on the federal government to take the lead. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you, Mr. DeMarco. And just very quickly, yesterday I met with Nature Canada. I'd like to highlight our government's $1 billion nature protection agreement with the province of British Columbia and various First Nations in the province. How important is protecting nature and achieving our climate ambition, our climate emissions reduction ambitions, but also our climate change ambitions? Just a very short answer so I can pass it over to Sophie.
Yeah, the more and more recognition of the interplay between the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, both in terms of negative effects of climate on biodiversity, but also the role that nature can play in helping address climate. So the arrows go both ways on that in that cycle. So protecting and restoring natural habitat is one of the key measures to not only store carbon. It shouldn't just be about storing carbon, but also protecting wildlife and improving human
Thank you very
health.
much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Are major economies making efforts to ensure that their economies are greened? They're making investments and creating policies, but there are also concerns about competitiveness. And more we hear about carbon pricing and adjustments of this in terms of tariffs for countries that don't do this. So, can you tell us, perhaps in writing, and perhaps Environment Canada can respond, where does Canada sit in that discussion? Because the European Union has just created this for such a thing for cement, for example. So, in 1 minute.
You're referring to border carbon adjustments? Yeah. We would have to table some information for you. I can't speak to that issue directly.
Parfait, mais ça serait très.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And we also talked about competitiveness between provinces, because in Quebec we have a carbon exchange, but if there's carbon pricing at the federal level, and if that was cut down, wouldn't the competitiveness between provinces, for those who are making an effort and those who are not, what do you think would happen?
And we can table some more information, but I think it's fair to say there would be efficiencies for having a common national market rather than different provincial programs.
Absolument. 100%
Perfect.
d'accord. Merci.
That's it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Ms. Chadell. Mr. Garand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, the government has set targets to electrify the federal fleet of vehicles, and we read the report, we can see that that's doomed to failure. When we listen to the government, they tell us that they need such specific vehicles that it's not possible. But is it necessary for the Canadian Army to have electric tanks? I mean, we understand that 93% of the fleet could be electrified. So it's surprising that the federal government is not even able to pick that lowest hanging fruit of all. So I'd like to know tangibly and immediately, in terms of supply or procurement, what can federal departments and organizations do in order to be more successful, which shouldn't be too difficult? Should they perhaps not be inspired by Canada Parks or the CBSA, who seem to have done a lot better than other departments and organizations? Well, this comes out as part of the report on net zero. We know that the target is 2030, and we know that they need to do something to change their approach if they're going to be in a position to reach that and not fail again. There's enough time yet to meet that target, but they need to be strategic, and they need to act immediately. Because the vehicles, but doing what? By doing what? Well, with light vehicles, they could move immediately. There'll be some wait times because the market is limited. But they need to begin immediately with light vehicles and then wait a few years for technology to catch up with heavy trucks and so on. But they could act immediately. I've got 20 seconds left, but for example, at Parks Canada, is that what they did? They planned more in advance? They got their names onto lists and vehicles are coming in. Did they plan better? Yes, well, that's our recommendation. Having a strategic approach. Light vehicles are available now. So they should speed up the acquisition of those and then wait a few years and see if trucks will be available later. And with targets and milestones and all of those things. So yes, it's possible. And I hope that our report will encourage them to speed up their efforts in a better strategic way.
And our last questioner is Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Earlier, my colleague, Mr. Deltel, noted that he bought a second-hand zero-emission vehicle in Quebec, and I'd be remiss if I didn't note that his province of Quebec and my province of British Columbia are the only two provinces that have incentives in place for used zero-emission vehicles. And it's appeared in two mandate letters for the federal Minister of Environment to put a federal incentive in place for used vehicles, and yet we have seen nothing from this government. So it seems like one of the things that could be done. On the topic of government fleet vehicles, every day that I'm in the capital, I walk from my office in Confederation Building up that little hill to West Block, and I walk past a long line, many days, I walk past a long line of black government SUVs that carry the ministers around to their various locations around town. And I may be mistaken, but in the 4 years I've been here, I've only noticed one zero-emission vehicle that carries a minister of this government, and that is the black Chevy Bolt that carries the Minister of Environment. Now, it would seem for a government that at times seems fixated on optics over substance, that this wouldn't just be the low-hanging fruit. This is the lowest hanging fruit. This is fruit you can pick lying on your back under the tree. And so we talk about a whole-of-government approach, and I don't even know who I'm going to ask this question to, Mr. Chair, because it's more of a comment. But one of Mr. DeMarco's observations in his report is that there's a lack of a whole-of-government approach. And it seemed to me that this symbol, the fact that there's only one vehicle that totes ministers around Ottawa that is a zero-emission vehicle, is a really poignant, it's a poignant example of the lack of a whole-of-government approach. And so my question and how I'll end our meeting today is just to ask Mr. DeMarco if he would agree.
In a few seconds. So in terms of low-hanging fruit, I'm not sure if it's that easy or whether an analogy can be made to Tantalus, but we'll have to see in terms of how easy it is to switch. I believe there actually is a requirement for executives, so ministers and deputy ministers, and perhaps our friend from Treasury Board could elaborate on that, because it isn't supposed to be a situation where there's only one or two. The executive fleet is supposed to be green.
Yeah, so there is a requirement for for executive vehicles to be electric, and currently there's 84 84 executive vehicles, of which there are only 4 internal combustion engines. The rest are hybrid electric or plug-in hybrid or electric.
Is a hybrid vehicle considered zero emission?
It's not zero emission, but the requirement is that be hybrid or electric, but with priority to electric. So there are 19 plug-in hybrids for electric, and as they turn over, the requirement.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone, the witnesses coming out. Commissioner, thank you for doing the study. As you can tell, there's still lots of questions and lots of good data we can still get out of and make sure this important subject moves forward. Thank you for everyone supporting me today, and a meeting adjourned.